Good afternoon. Welcome to everybody to this session, to this panel. My name is Elisabetta Lazzaro. I'm a professor of cultural economics at the University of the Creative Arts, the Business School for the Creative Industries. And I would like to thank everybody, starting from the conference organizers, in particular, Trine Bille and Browning Cote, for inviting us to hold this panel. I would like to thank our panelists that I will introduce, and I would like to thank all the attendees for your patience and endurance in this such a long day of the conference. So this is the panel on public versus private cultural policy and the emergence of new financing mechanisms on the art market, an interdisciplinary perspective. And I would like to introduce our panelists in the order of their interventions. Adriana Turpin, Christine Zumello, Charlotte Gould, Giovanni Maria Riccio and Federica Pezza, and Daniel Nordgärd. First of all, I would like to shortly introduce this panel. So since its establishment, cultural economics has been concerned with the fundamental issue in cultural policy, namely the financing of the arts, presenting a polarity between the possible roles played by respectively the public and private sector. On the other hand, because of the complexity of their nature and of their implications, cultural policy and arts funding, similarly to other issues, cannot be left to the exclusive considerations of the economic perspective. At the same time, the economic perspective can mutually benefit of a plurality of relevant disciplinary approaches for their theoretical and methodological information. The interdisciplinary rationale, and in particular at the roots of researching art markets, past, present, and tools for the future, is a global interdisciplinary diachronic thematic forum on a few hundred art market scholars so far, and experts from economics, art history, cultural policy and politics, sociology, cultural studies, statistics, anthropology, etc., from the 6 continents. So it's a real global forum, funded in 2017 by art historian Adriana Turpin, here present with us, and cultural economist Nathalie Moureau and myself. The panel of this afternoon is a further and novel elaboration of some initial considerations that took place at our last meeting, at our latest international workshop in Paris last month. In addition, this panel aims to offer a real example of interdisciplinarity applied to cultural policy research in the context of the financing of contemporary visual arts from both the public and the private policy perspectives. More specifically, the dominant institution of the art market and the role of its traditional intermediaries are questioned by the study of the emergence of some financing mechanisms, which in the last decades have seen the interplay of public as well as private policies. This panel is contributed by theoretical and empirical papers, some of them in quite new settings, from politics, cultural studies, art history, law, economics, and business, stimulating, we hope, and interdisciplinary reflection and debate through a diversity of methodological approaches. Now, I would like to give the floor to Adriana Turpin, the co-founder of Researching Art Markets, professor of art history at IESA and Culture in Paris. Please, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Elisabetta, and it's an honor to be with you in this afternoon's conference. So really, I'm just going to say a few words about the project that Elisabetta has already described, which she, Nathalie Moreau, and I have been working on for the last 4 years, Tools for the Future, Researching Art Markets Past and Present. And so we have held 6 workshops of, as Elisabetta has already said, international and interdisciplinary, intradisciplinary academics to really explore and investigate different aspects of the art market. So each workshop has focused on a particular aspect to explore it from the different roles of the historic perspective and also the contemporary art market, looking at themes and commonalities as well as differences and changes that have taken place. And we are enormously proud and thrilled to say that the first publication, which Elisabetta has, I think, in her hands, Tools for the Future, published with Routledge, came out earlier this year, well, a few weeks ago, in fact, and we are now looking forward to the second volume, which will be call for papers will go out shortly on 2 of the workshops, law and this one on financing in the art market. So I think I'm going to leave that to our wonderful speakers to carry on and present their papers. But I hope you all will follow our news, join our workshops, and listen to our call for papers and reply. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Adriana. In the spirit of interdisciplinary, we are organized as follow. We will have the 4 presentations in a row in order then to have a whole discussion session with your question and answers. And our answers. So please, if you have questions, do use the Q&A section on the conference platform. So I'm very pleased to introduce the first speaker, Christine Zumello. Christine is a full professor of American Studies at Université Sorbonne Nouvelle and vice president of the Institut des Amériques for North America. So Christine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. I'm going to share my screen. So please let me know if it works or if it doesn't.
Yes, it works.
Thank you very much. So thank you again, Elisabetta. I want to thank the organizers of this great conference, and of course, again, our host panel here, and Elisabetta in particular for convening this group to speak today. The scope of my talk, as you can see from the title of my this first slide, is liquidity and worth. So these are the 2 words that I would like to put into perspective today in this talk, and also give you a few hints. I'm afraid it's only going to be hints given the short time that we have, and show how liquidity and worth do illustrate some trends in the contemporary art market in the United States today. So part of a trend, this is, as a few words of introduction, part of a trend or becoming, which is also now becoming a fairly well documented trend which is called the financialization of the art market. Financialization also being this very umbrella term, which we can of course discuss. So one of the first things that I want to address through liquidity and worth is this financialization of a non-financial asset, which is an artwork or which artworks. A second element that I would like to start talking about today, and in particular, maybe look at 4 aspects of one particular trend of liquidity, is consider what is art as an asset class. Try and give you a few hints of art in the financial ecosystem, and to finish, bridge a few aspects of around the question of legitimacy, and in particular, this question of legitimacy of the art in finance or finance in art. Those are 2 back and forth situations which help us make a difference between value and worth. And I'll try to show that these 2 terms are not necessarily interchangeable. And to finish, I will say a few words about impact investing and also client experience, and maybe try to unpack the very common expression that everybody has used, and it's been used often again and again, as make an experience worthwhile, or make an investment worthwhile. So those are some of the few hints, the few satellites that I would like to address in this short talk. The first point that I would want to make has to do with financializing a non-financial asset. And art and money, as everybody knows, of course, is not a new association, but the ascent of finance within capitalism to attain or to become finance capitalism, or the financialization of the economy, has been a general movement whose debut date is a matter of contention, but which can be identified in the United States as coinciding with the early 1970s. So the financialization of the economy is accompanied by a series of trends, more or less stable, which have reached the art market as well. So the development of both the economy and the art market in more financial terms. So considering the theme of this conference, the frame of my talk today falls within the more general meaning of the financialization of the economy. Now, financialization obviously means the incursion of financial vocabulary, liquidity being one of them, and financial techniques and approaches in the art market, and I will give you a few examples today. So art as an asset class, and an asset class being a category of investments which have similar characteristics. So the most common asset classes that everybody knows are stock, equities, bonds, as fixed income securities, real estate, commodities, or futures. So this is based on the monetization strategies for fine art and collectibles. And it stresses the fact that fine art, but that also includes investment grade wine, classic cars, coins, have become or are trying to become or be put forward by financial institutions as asset classes in their own right, together with financial product. And the idea here is to unlock value, and unlocking value in a work of art, or helping it become part of this financialization trend, or becoming a financial asset class, helps us make a first distinction between the value, the monetary value of a work of art, and the worth of a work of art. And in between the two words, the two expressions, value and worth, this is maybe where we can find speculation, and I will get back to that towards the end of my talk. So this trend of trying to unlock value in works of art, monetizing works of art, making them liquid or more liquid, is a trend which is expected to continue as big data in particular enables more accurate valuations, or is trying to enable more accurate valuations of these holdings. And this obviously helps advisors grapple with the challenges associated with incorporating these assets into estate planning, asset allocation, tax, and philanthropic planning. So art in this more, what I call a financial ecosystem, the fact that art or works of art have entered or trying to enter the financial ecosystem in a more, quote, rational way, is based on the idea that there's a change of paradigm where passion and intuition are replaced in the art market by calculated, informed decision-making assisted by increasingly abundant flows of information, increasingly sophisticated market devices, and new stocks of knowledge. This process has involved a wide range of actors, academic economists, but also investment funds. I'm going to say a few words about that. Auction data providers, art market research companies, art appraisers, of course, legal advisors, insurance companies, accountants, in particular for tax purposes and inheritance purposes. So art and artworks traveling to the category of assets is a prerequisite considering, sorry, as a, I was trying to change slides. So art and artworks traveling to the category of assets is a prerequisite for considering art as professionally manageable category, and it opens the door to their consideration by investment funds. So investment funds being baskets of pools of financial instruments which are cut up into shares of the fund and managed by a fund manager, with pre-tailored hedging approaches depending on the level of risk which is associated with the fund. The most common or most conservatively managed investment fund in the US is, as everybody knows, mutual funds. And there's obviously a fine gradation of funds up to the riskiest ones, but also the ones which can potentially offer the highest return, hedge funds. So investment funds and wealth managements, wealth as part of wealth management, this is where, this is one entry point for art as being professionally managed. This is a screenshot, a slide from JP Morgan Wealth Management, where you see that it says, do you think of your art collection as a financial asset? So portfolio management and portfolio diversification is a major feature of wealth management, or including art or artworks, art collections in a fund. Now, diversification is and has long been one of the basic portfolio management tools, and a developing streak of diversification in portfolio management, in particular related to wealth management, as in this particular case, hinges around what is called holistic wealth management, in particular for high net worth individuals. So it means that art and collectibles are part of the services offered by portfolio managers, in particular at private banks and family offices. So the aim being here to bring works of art in the same category as financial assets, and not just as marginal fringe elements which might or might not be valued as part of a portfolio. Now, one of the major issues here is that the rise and fall of in art market sales and prices is sometimes viewed with suspicions, with fear, with awe, and professionals are not necessarily prepared to change and adapt the strategy according to their to these market trends. Secondly, there's also a lack of understanding and knowledge about the art market and how to respond to rising art valuations for assets which are still, in many cases, not liquid enough. So wealth managers are still hesitant to incorporate art and collectibles into their services because of the low transparency, the unregulated nature of the market, the lack sometimes of internal expertise, the difficulty in measuring benefits, and also the lack of liquidity. And I'm going to get back to that. So one of the major issues is, and I wanted to, this is a second slide taken from Citi, private bank of Citigroup, art and advisory financing. And you see that it's clearly stated at the end of the little paragraph that for over 40 years of pioneering art advisory and finance services have guided clients through the global art market, helping them build collections and achieve liquidity from artworks. Valuation of works of art is a major area of change, and it's a sign for a need for more standardization, which is also an avenue that will facilitate liquidity and potentially maybe build or strengthen art exchanges. So the importance of liquidity is that one of the major issues from an investment perspective is the potential lack of liquidity of a work of art. So acquiring a work with value might not be easily saleable, and thus freeze its intrinsic value, make it worth less, and bind it to the risk of not being able to sell it when needed by the owner. So a series of financial initiatives are taken to try and make the art market more liquid, and liquidity again being the ease with which an asset, a security, in this particular case an artwork, can be converted into cash, and the level or the level of marketability of an asset. So in this particular case, a work of art. So I just want to go through very quickly a series of financial initiatives that are taken, whose aim is not solely, but also to make, to render this new asset class more liquid. One of the very common ways or financial category is securitization. So securitization of works of art, drawing contracts out of an underlying work of art, is obviously now a very common established financial market and technique. And I will just refer you to, this is the screenshot of the homepage of the CME, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is one of the biggest in terms of volumes derivative markets in the United States, based in Chicago. And they're not yet, artworks are not yet, of course, exchanged on the CME, but I just wanted to point out a couple of features of the CME to show that a certain number of things are trying to be moved into the art market with difficulty. And you see that one of the major features of the CME group, this is a screenshot that I took yesterday, so Chicago Mercantile Exchange, you see that at the bottom of the slide that it says that the CME has a liquidity tool. So liquidity is definitely one of the major ingredients of a functioning, valued market, worthwhile financial market, which is something that the art market is still grappling with. Another screenshot from CME, highly liquid futures, options, over-the-counter and cash markets mean more possibilities. Again, so this is the list of commodities that are being traded on the CME, and I'm going to rush through these slides. I don't have time to spend too much time on this today, but there are a certain number of features here which are extremely important for the art market, but very budding as we speak. So I'm going to, I also wanted to show you this new kind of futures, which was created on the CME, which is weather futures. So it in order to show that the underlying asset does not necessarily have to be a financial asset. And the weather, so increasing or decreasing temperatures in the US are also contracts, futures contracts, which are traded on the CME. Here you can easily find them on the website of on the public website of the CME. So heating and cooling temperatures. The potential for those financial techniques to reach the art market are there. So apart from securitization, another financial possibility initiative, which is groping into the art market, so besides securitization, is art loan for collectors, which is at the moment about 90% of the art loan business is dominated by US institutions. So it's art secured lending. And this niche market, which is more developed in the United States. So here you have, for example, the Fine Art Group is saying that it's granting loans from $1 million to $150 million, 50% loan to value. Bank of America also has an art loan for collectors. So it publicizes the fact that the art collection can be used as a collateral. So collateral being seen also as a way to build value, build liquidity on the worth of your work of art. Fractional investment or fragmented ownership. So security tokens in particular are also part of the financial initiatives that are being explored at the moment by several businesses in order to try and bank on the value of the work of art. This is Market Works, where you see that the contemporary art market performance is compared to the S&P, the Standard & Poor's, one of the major stock indexes, American stock indexes, the S&P 500, with here some very good signs where, according to this statistic, the contemporary art market is outperforming the S&P by almost 50%. Otis is another business, online business, which was launched in 2019 and which positions itself as a culturally relevant, quote, community-owned museum powered by the people in the community. And Otis's first offering will be Kehinde Wiley's St. Jerome, Hearing the Trumpet, The Last Judgment, painted in 2018. By the way, just as a reminder, Kehinde Wiley is the painter who painted the official portrait of President Obama that everybody will remember, which is now hanging in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. So Otis's first offering will be Kehinde Wiley's St. Jerome's painting, purchased by the platform earlier this year. Mecenas is another art investment platform. And Look Lateral, again, is another art platform where they want to launch a fractional investment marketplace in order to try and cut up works of art into shares. Now, Look Lateral has a particular feature addressing clearly the question of liquidity and showing that art is difficult to sell or collateralize. It is but also highly illiquid due to its unique and bulky nature. So this is a very fuzzy area of the art works catapulted into the art market and dealing with illiquidity. Art Square, I also wanted to say, just to point out a term, an expression that is used, still the same website, Look Lateral. And Look Lateral used roadshow, which is a very financial term used by most financial institutions and investment banks when they want to sell a new financial product. They will have a roadshow. And this is very much what Look Lateral is doing. As you see, that's before the pandemic, of course, which stopped a certain number of initiatives in their tracks. Look Lateral was doing a roadshow, conducting a roadshow in some of the most publicized, well-known art fairs, Art Basel being one, of course. Art Square, which is again in the various new trends and apps that are being put together, where works of art again can be bought and sold in increments, in fragments. So this is one of the challenges, trying to turn in real life, in real practice, works of art into financial assets, making them live as such. And to finish, I wanted, as I said at the very beginning, to just hint at a few issues about these trends that are developing as we speak. One issue is the question of legitimacy of the financialization of art, which would be a major question also for art historians. But it's a question of legitimacy that cuts both ways. It's both a question for the art world, but also for the financial world. Illiquidity being definitely a question of the legitimacy of investing in art. And in particular, one could refer to Viviane Zelizer, who talks about hostile worlds where, according to her, there's an intrinsic conflict between art and finance, and that the incommensurable value of art is at risk, its worth is at risk once it is standardized and transformed into a speculative object. Another issue that pertains to legitimacy is the question of the instrumentalization of art or culture and culture. So in marketing terms, this is called impact investing in art and culture. And this is part of a growing transitional trend, which hinges around the, quote, client experience, and that leads to seeking more emotional and personal connections between wealth managers and their clients. And one of the major issues with seeking more emotional and personal connections is that in many guises, in many ways, they're very, very difficult to assess, to value. It can be very irrational. So this is a major frontier that needs to be addressed and to be breached, because it has to do obviously with experience. So the idea that for corporations, art or art institutions can or are becoming PR, public relations machines, that feed into their CSR policies, sometimes their sales machine, and that gives them a cultural leverage. So the worth here is definitely something that they're also after, not just the value, in order to have something worth, quote, their money. So this is another avenue of research, which is unraveling as I speak. To conclude, very quickly, I want to say maybe one word about what I've been working on of art as a financial polder, so a financial territory that is being conquered. So if it is achieving the status of a financial asset for financiers, it is in many ways has to grapple, to come to terms with this idea of worth, and which cannot necessarily be totally quantified. So again, the opposition between liquidity and worth raises again the opposition, the very basic but important dichotomy between quantitative and qualitative. Rating agencies are still absent from the financialized art market, and as we know, they're a major tool, instrument of liquidity in most markets, of information gathering, and which some might see as a good sign given the latest events obscuring their roles. Another and final point that I want to make is that the financialized art market remains today mostly an OTC market, an over-the-counter market, and that the volume trading, the volume of art trading on the few markets, body markets that I just showed is minimal compared to the financial markets, whether they're futures market or stock markets or bond markets in the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine, for your very interesting presentation. Issues in the finance of the arts that might be obvious for some finance scholars applying the finance to the arts, but not really to the rest of scholarships dealing with the arts, the value of the arts, what value for the arts. So I would like to now move from a speculative, rather speculative private policy, as you said, banking on the value of art, to public policies of semi-independent art commissioning agencies in the UK. Unfortunately, Charlotte cannot be here with us today, but she prepared a video that will be screened for you. So Charlotte Gould is an assistant professor in British culture and art at Sorbonne Nouvelle, where she's member of the research group 1921. So if you can please start the video. Prepared a video that will be screened.
In the United Kingdom, and since the late 20th century, both the state and private sponsors have been keen to support the commissioning of increasingly monumental, spectacular, mixed media artworks. Anish Kapoor's ArcelorMittal Orbit has been described as the tallest commission of public art in Britain, but Nicholas Sirota has also said that it is the greatest piece of patronage. It was unveiled in 2012 to coincide with the inauguration of the Olympic Village, and it flamboyantly exemplifies many of the novelties which have shaped the British art ecosystem since the early 80s. First, well, the abusive use of the word patronage to in fact refer to corporate sponsorship. Then the incorporation of the sponsor's name in the very title of the work. The 80s and 90s were a time when art sponsors successfully pushed for their brands to be integrated in the official names of art prizes and events. For example, the Barclays Young Artist Award, the BP Portrait Award. This is something that Chin Ta Wu has explained. Also, the use of public art for urban regenerative purposes. Orbit put forward the redevelopment of the east of London in its intended Olympic legacy use. Finally, its monumental character and elaborate engineering, which required production funds to be invested ahead of the creation of the work rather than down the line on the when the artwork enters the market, while relying on the emergence of complex public and private commissioning models. Besides some commissions originating from very wealthy individuals, today's various commissioning models have become quite complex, both practically and conceptually, relying on public and private partnerships and co-sponsoring. Many new parameters accompanied these new practices and aesthetic changes. The injection of national lottery money into the art sector from 1993 under John Major, who did not share his predecessor Margaret Thatcher's qualms about state-sanctioned gambling. The rise of foundations, which have gone hand in hand with the mounting number of very rich collectors and funders, encouraged by neoliberal tax incentives, see here, of course, the different finance acts of the 80s, and of course the introduction of the, in particular, of the gift aid scheme under Thatcher. And also new mixed economy structures, which are able to harness both the stability of state funding and the seduction of art for private philanthropy. Typically, Nesta, which was set up in 1998 with an endowment coming from lottery money, and which runs the Innovation in Giving Fund, was one of these new charities which aimed to encourage other charities to diversify their income in a creative manner. This adjective, creative, which is often used in this context, points both to the novelty of the new modernized types of charitable contributions that it promotes, but also to the challenging economic context, to say the least, from which the need for them arose. Resilience has also been a very important buzzword in cultural policies. The diversion by the Thatcher government of state funding distributed via the Arts Council since after the war towards matching schemes, towards the encouragement of business sponsorship, had broken this welfare state consensus and transformed the national art ecosystem in the early 80s. Tax breaks were, of course, central to the shaping of this new Tory model, but she went further in 1984 by introducing the Business Sponsorship Incentive Scheme, the BSIS, patronized by King Charles in a country in which meeting a royal is often reward enough for giving for many. It offered to match with a public grant any money given to the arts by a business corporation, thus effectively conditioning state patronage to the securing of private patronage. In her book, Privatizing Culture, Chintao Wu has explained how businesses were allowed to claim the benefits derived from this extra state funding in terms of their own publicity and recognition. So it was a commercial deal rather than actual philanthropy. Today, I want to draw from some conclusions from two objects that I've studied at different times. From first my recent research on art commissioning agencies, and in particular on London-based trust Art Angel. These are their offices in London. And from older research I had done on the YBA, Young British Art scene in the late 80s, to try and see links which might shed light on the dramatic changes which occurred in the art sector in Britain from the 80s, and more specifically from 1985, which I'm going to use as something of a key date here. When discussing the YBAs, the Sensation exhibition comes to mind, of course, as a sort of apotheosis. It was marketed as a British revenge on half a century of American art market domination, especially when it traveled to Brooklyn, to the Brooklyn Museum in 1999. Yeah. In fact, this exhibition was British collector Charles Saatchi's triumph, the presentation of his personal collection at the Royal Academy. And so the celebration of a private collection, Saatchi had started accumulating with his wife Doris. Here we have a portrait of her by Mapplethorpe, after making his fortune in advertising, famously in political advertising, because he was behind this Tory placard, thus attaching even more clearly his fortune to the Thatcher years. But also Saatchi's AceCaf ad for the V&A, which has become something of a notorious ad, and has itself become an exhibit. 1985 was the year when Charles Saatchi opened his own gallery on Boundary Road after the New Patrons of New Art debacle. Sacchi had been part of a discrete group of British collectors within the Friends of the Tate scheme to assist in the acquisition of new work, and as a reaction to the infamous bricks scandal, when Tate was reproached with spending public money on Carl André's equivalent 7, or as the tabloids put it, just a big load of bricks or of rubbish. But when the Tate Gallery mounted a Julian Schnabel exhibit in 1983 with the private support of the PNA, the Patrons of New Art, the public was suddenly made aware that Sacchi was himself a member of the group, as well as a collector of the artist, of the American artist. The uproar was this time created by the use of private money to raise an artist's profile and give his body of work museum quality, which might benefit the collector down the road. That was when Sacchi quit the PNA and decided to wield his artistic influence differently, by creating his own gallery, Sacchi Gallery, with a very American, very industrial, all-white look. After collecting all the big American names since Warhol, Sacchi had borne the brunt of the 1990 art market crash and had become interested in the much cheaper young British artists, whom he started buying in bulk after visiting the Frieze exhibition in 1998. Frieze had been this artist-curated exhibition in an old biscuit factory in the Docklands that Thatcher was in the process of regenerating at the time. And also done at a time when budget cuts were pushing artists to become, in the new Thatcherian lingo, entrepreneurial. 9 years later, Sensation celebrated Sacchi's success in creating the movement of the decade, in giving it its name and in putting Britain on the world art map. But while the exhibition was aggressively marketed by both Sacchi and the Arts Council, but also by the British Council abroad, as a British success over American dominance, I believe it was in fact a demonstration of the prevalence of the US model, which had taken over since 1980. Tax breaks for art giving, a new cultural policy of only matching public funding to private funding, and hybridization of art funding through sponsorship, often described as a Trojan horse at the time and ever since. Not that art sponsorship did not exist before in Britain. It did. Cigarettes money was omnipresent on the 60s scene. But this was taken to a whole other level, with BP being present everywhere. Also the family company Sackler giving its name to one of the wings of the Serpentine Gallery in London. As I said, 1985 is a central date here because this was the year David Harding was appointed head of the new Environmental Art Department at Glasgow School of Art. This new transdisciplinary approach focused on the context of the work more than on its medium or genre. And Harding was going to introduce a new relation to urban but also rural environments and transform public art in Britain, probably paving the way for Britain's most famous examples of public art, the Angel of the North, this is Glasgow School of Art, the Angel of the North, and the fourth, Plinth Commissions. But also many commissions by agencies pledging to bring art closer to the public and presenting it in unexpected places. That's actually Art Angel's motto. For example, in a CNA store, an empty CNA store on Oxford Circus. The reason why the third instance in which 1985 can serve as a key date in this demonstration is the fact it also coincided with the founding of Art Angel, who organized this Michael Landy exhibition right in the center of London on one of its main high streets. Art Angel became Britain's major art commissioning agency, and also something of a template for other possibilities. London was finding a place at the center of an international art market boom in which art was becoming an asset class. Art historian Roger Tooke and his associate John Carson celebrated the surge of interest in contemporary art, but they also felt that it masked a dangerous downside, the risk that most art would now adapt to more commercial tastes and agendas. So the charity was founded as a privately funded initiative, and the first ever Art Angel exhibition happened in June '85 and celebrated non-commodifiable public art. An exhibition which included David Mach, Goldsworthy, Vera Frankel, right in the center of London, again on the spectacular, or Barbara Kruger. This last work probably a sign that inspiration was also coming from American public art and what some agencies had been doing in New York in the earlier decade. Creative Time in particular, and the other people behind Kara Walker's recent Subtlety, had themselves worked with Kruger. So Art Angel were taking inspiration from people like the people at Creative Time. Art Angel was very officially founded as a reaction to Thatcher's American-inspired cultural policies and against the way someone like Saatchi was profiting from this new context to advance his collection. Paradoxically, while it opposed the Tories' art cuts in its early days, that is, before it could eventually apply for Arts Council regular funding and become one of its regularly funded organizations, the RFOs. It involved exclusively private backers, people, different tiers of donors. The trust aimed to be experimental in the way it functioned, as well as in the art that it was going to help produce. Its role being different from that played by the plethora of public art consultancies, which the new cultural climate had fostered, for example, a platform or Artelier, many of them, in fact, simply brokering deals to decorate corporate lobbies. Functioning rather like Locus Plus in Newcastle, Art Angel never planned to mediate between a client and an artist. The emergence of such agencies continued under New Labour when Blair confirmed, rather than overturned, the system of new public management that the Tories had favoured and adopted a policy of what art workers started calling targetolatry, a focus on targets which only at least medium-sized organisations can monitor. So it's about not simply monitoring attendance, but also age groups, occupations, forms of diversity. The new need for accountability in part explained why over time the Arts Council gradually withdrew from funding individual artists in favour of funding organisations and cultural infrastructures which had the resources and staff to provide feedback on their actions and thorough self-assessments. In a fraught cultural context, the punitive cuts of the Thatcher and later the coalition governments, but also the political agenda of the Blair government's focus on the bountiful creative industries. The emergence of private charities aiming at supporting art and public engagement with culture appears, almost paradoxically, as a Tory dream of public disinvestment. The independent and semi-independent public art commissioning agencies, often charities, which emerged in the UK since the 80s. So besides Art Angel, we could mention the Public Art Development Trust, the Basement Group, Project UK, Outset, Situations, or Artichoke, navigated a context where the notion of the artist as isolated producer of artistic meaning had come under strain, whether we're thinking of also taking into account the people who allow the emergence of the work or its actualization in the eyes or even the hands of an active audience of participants. Think, of course, of Claire Bishop's British adaptation of Nicolas Bourriaud's Esthétique relationnelle as art's social term, and reliance on delegated performance and audience participation, for example, in Jeremy Deller's The Battle of All Grief, for which he hired former miners to do the reenactment. From the 70s onwards, and with the development of post-sculptural works, which resisted commodification, Biennales had started promoting one-off, site-specific, often spectacular installations. And so private foundations and trusts became increasingly involved in their production. The Henry Moore Foundation for Sculpture, of course, the Elephant Trust, Calouste Gulbenkian, the Fine Family Foundation, both because their input was needed to support these developing new forms and because the new artistic paradigm allowed them to become involved without needing to then collect, display, or preserve an actual material collection. Among the main organizations experimenting with new philanthropic models was the Dia Foundation in New York, whose collection mostly of earthworks, while requiring a budget for conservation, does not necessitate too many particularly expensive square feet in New York. In the market-led climate of the 80s, a more traditional way of financing art, harking back to pre-market structures, has therefore survived and flourished. That's art commissioning. Percent for Art policies and the Section 106 agreement, which prescribes the inclusion of public art in planning permissions, though not exactly statutory in Britain, have become the largest reason for commissioning art, meaning that public art commissioning in the UK has mostly originated from the private sector. In its 2015 public art survey, public art think tank Ixia indeed confirmed that since the end of the 20th century, the main driver for public art had continued to be private sector money aligned to public sector policy, especially national planning policies. Also, the very format of a lot of the art produced today, its professionalism, its scale, its technological advancement, mean that artworks are now conducted like projects needing planning, infrastructure, technical skill, and money. And Art Angel have excelled at conducting and encouraging such projects. We can think, of course, of Rachel Whiteread's house and the civil engineering involved in casting the inside of an empty terraced house and then peeling its exterior walls off. Research-based work requires long pre-production time. And this current taste for the monumental means that money needs to be injected in advance, not simply be the price paid down the road. But Beck's sponsorship, which we find here on the label of this beer bottle, was part of Hauser's hybridized budget. Art Angel may have started out as an alternative funding solution offered to artists working outside of the gallery, but also to art patrons, not necessarily wishing to own works. Backers of Art Angel are usually rewarded with more immaterial rewards that pertain to social distinction. They're invited to dinners, private views, etc. It is, however, difficult to see it as an alternative organization today, considering the large number of trusts or foundations now working alongside artists without a permanent exhibition space, refining ever more elaborate bespoke models of funding and production, and collaborating with public and private backers. In the context of British philanthropy, Art Angel is an operative body which allows gift giving first to operate on the same level as public and corporate funding, but also to orient cultural trends. Helmut Anheier and Diana Leet in Creative Philanthropy suggest that a lot of the most innovative funding today is of the non-democratic sort and comes from trusts and foundations which work for the public but on their own terms. Still, we remark that at the turn of the century, anti-opioids and anti-greenwashing groups have shed light on some of the darker aspects of this widespread hybridization of art funding, and mostly on the imbalance between the money these corporations and foundations invest and the actual benefits that they reap. Thank you very much for listening.
So this was the presentation by Charlotte. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for virtually being with us. The presentation of Charlotte raised other important issues. And in particular, she was discussing the model of art agencies, which by mission distribute public funds, and as the model should be independent from political conflicts of interest, such as in possibly ministries of culture. On the other hand, Charlotte pointed out to the fact that this model is not perfect because other conflicts of interest are in place, can be in place, and in particular with the private sector. So a very drastic question of us could be, should contemporary arts and also contemporary artists be left market mechanisms? In the second part of this panel, we will draw your attention to an emerging mechanism of financing contemporary art, including contemporary visual artists, namely crowdfunding. And we will first look at the legal perspective, because as we know, crowdfunding is relatively new, so regulation, legislation are rather lagging behind, but notwithstanding that, for donation crowdfunding and reward crowdfunding, which mainly interests the arts, there are increasing legal initiatives in different countries. And the next presentation by Giovanni Maria Riccio and Federica Pezza will bring the Italian example. Giovanni Maria Riccio is professor of comparative law at the University of Salerno in Italy, where he teaches copyright law and cultural heritage law. And he was a consultant at the European Commission for the revision of the e-commerce directive. Federica Pezza, who will present, is an Italian attorney at law, specializing in intellectual property law, and PQ trademark attorney in the United Kingdom. So Federica, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Hello Elisabetta. Thank you very much for the presentation. And I'm now going to share my screen. Okay. So today we're going to talk about crowdfunding and art market. I was supposed to introduce this topic together with Professor Maria Riccio, but actually, unfortunately, could not make it. So I'm going to talk also on his behalf. What is going to be the structure of our presentation? We're going to start by looking at the notion of crowdfunding, which is actually a very difficult one to define. And then we're going to move, as Elisabetta was mentioning, to the legal framework in this respect in Italy, focusing on the Italian market, the Italian system. And starting from this point and the consideration of how partly beneficial is the Italian market, the Italian legislative framework, but also which are some of the main cons of this provision, we're going to look at comparative models, comparative approaches, and we're going to look in particular at the US model. And then based on this, we're going to try to propose our solution, or also anyways, possibly better legal framework and legal model. So let's start from the beginning. Let's start from the very beginning, actually, because when we talk about crowdfunding, we talk about basically a form of private investment. And when we going back to history and going back to Italian history, actually, the very first model of crowdfunding can be identified in the so-called mecenatismo of Lorenzo de' Medici. We are in Florence, and this guy is sitting in the center. Is Lorenzo, who actually, based on current studies, apparently has been spending more than $460 million just for the founding of art. So that's quite a good achievement. But actually, apparently, he doesn't regret anything of this. He's happy with his choices, and he says that he considers it to have been a great honor to our state. So at least he's pleased. But let's see now how, starting from these premises, crowdfunding evolved. We are now when we talk about crowdfunding, broadly speaking, we refer to a certain kind of funding, of private funding, based on based on raising small amounts of money from a large number of people. So, but this is a very broad definition, which actually is broad exactly for the reason that it's very difficult to define what crowdfunding is. As Elisabetta was mentioning, we have two main form of crowdfunding we have to consider when it comes to the art market. Although when together with Professor Riccio, we had identified actually 4 forms of crowdfunding, but the 2 of them, as Elisabetta says, are the more relevant for our topic. So what we talk about when we talk about crowdfunding, we talk about a donation-based crowdfunding, which actually, as the same word says, is a crowdfunding where there is no reward whatsoever. We talk about a reward-based crowdfunding, which, as the word says, is a crowdfunding where actually there is a reward. And we will see that actually this kind of reward can be of very different types. It doesn't really have to be a monetary one. And actually, if we have a non-monetary funding and reward, we have also the possibility to fidelize more the people contributing. And then we have 2 other figures, which are respectively lending-based crowdfunding and equity-based crowdfunding. And we're not going to consider them in details because they are not normally used in the art field. When we talk about lending-based crowdfunding, by the way, we talk about a kind of crowdfunding where the crowdfunding platform acts as an intermediary. While when we talk about the second model, we talk about a kind of a partnership where the kind of reward is actually given from the participation in the business, in the company. So we have said that we're going to focus on the two first forms of crowdfunding. On the one hand, the donation-based, on the other hand, the reward-based. And what is the very difference between the 2 models? It is the so-called animus donandi. Of course, while in the first case, the donation comes without any kind of justification, of financial or other kind of justification, it's just donating for the sake of donating, apparently. In the second case, we're going to consider a form of reward. But the thing that the reward is taken into account, exists, doesn't mean that this has to be a monetary one as anticipated. And in fact, a very good example in this respect is represented by the so-called BArt platform. This crowdfunding platform, which is a very interesting one, was developed by an Italian person, actually, Jessica Tanghetti, who and is a very interesting model because in this platform, which is dedicated to artists, art institutions, and art professionals, it is possible to engage in an efficient way in order to raise money. And as one can read also the same platform webpage, this is a reward-based platform because in return for the pledge, the supporter will get unique compensation. And we will find this very same model, this very same echo of a unique compensation also in the US. And it is actually this very same notion of uniqueness, which somehow can boost the investment from private people, from privates, because this is exactly what they're looking for, in particular when it comes to the art field. So let's now turn to the legislative framework. And since we are the two of us from Italy, let's focus on the Italian legal context. In Italy, what we have is the so-called art bonus decree. In particular, in the art bonus decree for the first time in 2014, and then afterwards this was made permanent as a provision. It was introduced a tax credit of 65% of the disbursement made, which are calculated on the 50% of the taxable income. This kind of tax credit arise and one can enjoy it, provided that an investment in art and culture is made. But as we will see, there are several restrictions and several requirements which have to be met. Overall, of course, we consider this measure as a very beneficial one because for sure is a very good attempt to start incentivizing and promoting somehow the investment for private people, from privates. But on the other hand, as you will see, there are also some drawbacks. So let's start from the good part of the art bonus and from some of the main implementation. We are here in Verona, the Arena di Verona, where we had a chance to raise 9 million euro. And we are here in Turin, the Egyptian Museum, where we raised, not myself, but a total of 1,500,000 euro was raised. And actually also numbers for 2020 were good because we have 500,000 million euro gathered. So it was a very good result overall. But if these are the beneficial aspects, on the other hand, we also have some drawbacks. And the very first one is that one can understand it also when looking at the two examples which I gave, because the two monuments I was looking at before are actually both located in the northern part of Italy. And in general terms, the art bonus decree was much implemented in the northern part of Italy, while in the south there are not so many interventions made based on it. In particular, other than this, what we identified together with Professor Riccio are three main limits. The very first limit concerns the scope of application. And actually what we see here is that the scope of application of the art bonus decree is an exclusively public one, which means that as things now stand, the art bonus scheme only applies to public art. So it is not possible to use this kind of incentive in order to invest in other form of art, such as private art, also contemporary form of art, also performances. And moving from this, we actually can go to the second drawback, which is very much connected to this. What we can talk about, in fact, in this context, is a form of legislative paternalism. And this because it is the legislator who is deciding what is that part of art which is worth protection and that part of art which is not worth protection. In particular, what we have here, in fact, is that the legislator is deciding what art is, which, as we know, has to be avoided in general terms. And also, it is somehow limiting the kind of investment which can be made, saying that one has to keep always a proportional relationship between revenues obtained from the business activity and the amount subject to tax relief. This form of paternalism.
Excuse me, Federica, since we will be cut in 15 minutes and we still have another presentation, may I kindly ask you to conclude in a very 1 minute for us? I'm sorry about that. The first speaker took a little bit more time.
Okay,
sorry
no
about
problem.
that.
I was sticking with the 20 minutes time. Sorry, that's why. But there is no problem. Okay, so basically, starting from this limit of the crowdfunding of the provision needs, we we focus on the main important one, the most important one. And as these limits exist, we tried in our paper, in our presentation, also to focus on other models. So we started a comparative approach to see to what extent other models might be beneficial. We looked at the French and at the UK model, but we mainly focused on the US system, where the so-called community foundation exists. This community and foundation act as a form of our charities, acting as a form of multipliers of investment and promoting local projects. And what we noticed in Italy is that we have somehow a very similar project and notion, which is the one of the Cariplo Community Foundation, which also act as multipliers of investment. But on the other hand, what we have here is that there is a more pyramidal structure, so a more vertical one. We have, aside from this drawback of the Cariplo Foundation, we have in general all those benefits which are also present in the US model. So there is more flexibility overall. You can also finance support other kind of artworks, such as private ones. And in general terms, the implementation of the Cariplo Foundation model was very good. So what are our conclusions based on this? In particular, what we have in Italy is a legislative framework, which is somehow beneficial, but on the other hand, can be implemented somehow. And otherwise, what we would risk to have are poverty traps, where there is an initial enthusiasm which ends suddenly, and there are no the right premises in order to develop any kind of new model. And so what we should look at are comparative models, such as the Community Foundation in the US, but the most important focus and the most important element has to be on the community. And so we need to implement community-based model, where also the decision-making is made from people, so from the community. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you so much, Federica, for your presentation and for your time consideration. The final presentation is by Daniel Nordgärd, senior researcher at Norge and associate professor at the University of Agder, Norway, where he teaches and researches in music business and digitization. And together with me, we will present, we will give the final presentation of today. And thank you to the very kind conference organizers. Since we are the last panel of the day, we will have some room for a discussion after 6 o'clock. So please stay with us. So Daniel, if you would like to please share the slides.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me see now, where is it? Yes. Let me see now. Here it is. So thank you. I'm going to try and just rush through these first slides, and then you can take us to the core. This is a preliminary and a very explorative phase of a 4-year project financed by the Norwegian Research Council. It's called Crowdfunding, and it launched in September 2020, and we're at the very beginning of this project. And with this presentation, we seek primarily feedback on some early findings and hope to have some form of input and dialogue on our approach and methods, as well as on the findings that we provide. Now, crowdfunding is often portrayed an alternative and financing model for amateur, early career, and DIY artists. However, other established and international artists, acclaimed artists, also deploy the model, and these are just 2 examples of the spectrum that we can find within this type of financing. Important with the arts market is that financing strategies are closely linked to intermediaries and gatekeepers, as some of the presentations today have illustrated. The art market is a typically for-profit and traditional sector, where for their income, visual artists mainly rely on trade through intermediaries, such as galleries, auctions, fairs, and in a few cases, online platforms. Public and charity support is rather limited to public projects and museum acquisitions. Also, the creative process and financial viability of living artists, there's an increasing freedom of media in contemporary visual art, such as installations, performances, mixed media, etc. And a movement away from tangible, permanent, stockable artworks, such as paintings, sculptures, towards more perishable, to include also perishable temporary live media, such as installations, performances, etc. Alongside this, there are also new digital financial and marketing strategies, such as crowdfunding. The overall aims with this is to explore financing patterns of contemporary visual artists and to test evidence of crowdfunding benefits drawn from theoretical and empirical literature in the case of contemporary visual artists. We wish to provide a taxonomy of crowdfunding of visual art projects based on installations and performances. The theoretical and practice implications are possible substitutional effects and in disintermediation in the arts market, and impact on crowdfunding, on the art market value chain, and on the role of commercial intermediaries in artists' income. And wish to look also on impact on crowdfunding on artists' aesthetic practices in general. The research questions that we work with is to find out what role does crowdfunding have on contemporary art market? To what extent is crowdfunding used to fund contemporary visual art? What are the main features of these crowdfunding campaigns, and what kind of artwork and artists are particularly interested? Following from this is to also look at crowdfunding as an alternative or rather complementary source of finance on the art market. And our methodological approach is theoretical and empirical testing of crowdfunding benefits, empirical and data-driven. Now, I was going to do a slide on what crowdfunding in the arts are. I'm not going to do this since Federica Pezza did a thorough overview, so I'm not going to spend time on this. However, draw your attention on some of the benefits that we can hope to find or see from creative and cultural crowdfunding. These include the direct benefits, such as lower transaction costs for fundraising, better outreach, better spread, market research. And there are also some indirect benefits, including democratization, better chances of attraction of traditional, and to foster entrepreneurship and to develop professional skills. I'm not going to dwell too much into this and leave a little bit more time for you, Elisabetta, to present and go through some of the work that we have done.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Daniel. So in 5 minutes, so our hypothesis and taxonomy. So the major research question is crowdfunding alternative or complementary funding for the visual arts, perishable visual arts of installations and performances. And also we have other hypotheses that contributes to form our taxonomy, such as the subsistence of art market traditional gatekeepers, and then the possible new gatekeeping role of Kickstarter. We also measure for artist creators' reputation, the geographical spread, and we test other benefits such as does crowdfunding allow market research and prototypes testing, etc., etc. So in the next slide, we present our data. So we look at the major international platform, Kickstarter, and we built an original data set where we complemented with internet information collected on internet on artist bios and art projects. And we put together all successfully completed campaigns all over the world since Kickstarter launched in 2009. And we looked at most funded campaigns, that is, which fetched more than $10,000 historically converted. And altogether, we had 70 installations and 126 performance art entries since 2011. And then we did the usual sample cleaning, and we came up with 44 art installations and 25 art performances. So in the next slide, you can see some description of our data set. So in the upper graph, the number in in the number of campaigns, and in graph the cumulated amount of US dollars raised in the different years. So apart the strange years because of the COVID pandemic of 2019-2020, we can observe increasing trends altogether. In the next slides, there are some few preliminary results. So I would like to draw your attention, for instance, to the first row. The number of campaigns with institutionalized artists or creators for art performances and art installations. And we can see that, especially for the case of art performances, more than one half of the successful campaigns were made by institutionalized artists, that is, artists being exhibited in museums and being represented by commercial art galleries. So should they need crowdfunding, but yet they use crowdfunding also. And then another measure for that, the artist creators still active, so that is not just one-shot game of these crowdfunding campaigns. So to conclude, we can jump to the next slide. So crowdfunding, we can show from these preliminary results, is both alternative and complementary source of financing for contemporary visual artists. There are increasing trends in crowdfunding adoption. Artists and creators are skilled campaigners because we saw that from the data we didn't have the time to show. However, at the same time, other crowdfunding benefits were not confirmed by our preliminary results. In particular, the geographical spread is still limited to the US and also Europe. There is no evidence that crowdfunding does allow market research and prototypes testing. Perhaps this is true for more creative industries, expressions like fashion or other things, and does not improve information and reduces asymmetric information. Moreover, we found no evidence that crowdfunding fosters interaction with backers, nor community involvement or co-creation with the audiences. So this was a big disappointment, especially on the side of Daniel. And also we had no clear evidence that crowdfunding democratizes funding. And to conclude further research, we are going to combine this data set with the information on other financing alternatives and enlarge Kickstarter and our market finance data. Thank you so much for your attention. And now, since we were kindly given other supplementary 10 minutes, so thank you to all the participants for your patience for being here. Unfortunately, we can read only questions. You cannot speak in our virtual room, but I can see a couple of questions. The first one by Daniel. Donations are sensitive to tax reductions, but also to the economic growth. What is the contemporaneous balance in Italy after the post-2014 law boost and the pandemic crisis? So clearly, this is a question for you, Federica.
Can you, sorry, can you please repeat the question, because it was my microphone wasn't working.
Yes, so donations are sensitive to tax reductions, but also to the economic growth. What is the contemporaneous balance in Italy after the post-2014 law boost and the pandemic crisis?
Yeah, thank you for the query, for the question. So this is a very good point, actually. And in fact, when looking at one of the main things we're looking at when looking at this decree was actually also how the COVID affected the funding. And data in this respect were quite, and also related to the economic growth in Italy, which of course was not great in this period. But our findings, which were quite surprising, because in general terms, we had a funding which was more or less the same. I mean, rates were actually the same also during the COVID period, which means that people were keeping investing also in this period. And what a consideration we were actually making also in Paris on this point was that it might be that a shift occurred in some kind of platforms where, for example, there was a kind of funding which was both, for example, as it happens in the US, which was both for social projects and for art and culture projects, because of course in the COVID period, these social features and these social aspects were more promoted than the artistic, the exclusively artistic one.
Thank you very much, Federica. I hope that Daniel, you are satisfied with the answer. There is another question from Jose. Hello, I was wondering if you could tell me from where did you get the data? Did they provide it to you, or how did you got it? I suppose this is for the last presentation. So perhaps Daniel, would you like to go and respond?
Yes, it's been painstaking work going through the Kickstarter pages themselves and just going project by project, literally just putting down the data on spreadsheets. So it's, you know, it's publicly available and limited, of course, to the type of data that we can access from the Kickstarter pages.
Yeah, but on the other hand, we had also to complement this data with information on the artist bio. For instance, Kickstarter doesn't provide information whether these are established artists represented by commercial art galleries, and so you need also art market data, and also to know. So some of the information is in Kickstarter, some other we had to gather from other sources. But as Daniel said, time demanding inspection. And there is another question from Carolina. One for consideration. Thank you, Carolina. As for so Elisabetta and Daniel's paper, I saw that the majority of rewards are not the art itself, as you show in the table. Would you please comment on why you think this is happening in the case of art projects, and then combined with the limited geographic spread? Is it the case for a community-based involvement rather than product-oriented endeavor? Thanks. Thank you, Carolina. Daniel, sorry, would you like to go for that?
Yes, with regards to the first one, I think it's a misunderstanding. The thing that we want to avoid with this is to avoid the type of art projects that is simply just putting out, selling paintings. It's not really to seek funding for an art project in some way or another. A lot of the projects do provide parts of the artistic experience in some way or another, but we want to differentiate between we want to separate the projects that are simply just eBay, that they just sell the pieces of art. It's not really a crowdfunding project as per se, as the ones that we are looking for. That would be pretty accurate, wouldn't it, Elisabetta?
Yeah, thank you. And so basically, Carolina, if I interpret your the second part of your question, or your second question, basically through your second question, you are confirming what Daniel pointed out. So we want to really, by the nature of art performances and art installations, these are not really tradable items. So yes, in order really to distinguish the commodification chip, if you want, or just the direct commodification of art to sell products from a truly committing doing performances, installations that, as we know, are typical, very ephemerical forms of art. Yes, Daniel?
Yes, and if I understand Carolina's question correctly, it's also a question of the geographic spread that it is. I think when we get to work a little bit more with the data, I think part of it is, it could be that it is more community-based, yes, and that the community-based is communities that are beyond the art, the platform itself, but more, real life community, so to speak, which also has some geographic and physical boundaries and limitations.
I would like to ask our panelists if they have cross questions and comments with respect to the various presentations of this panel. Adriana, perhaps would you like to make a comment? Do you have a question?
Well, Christine threw out the challenge to art historians about the role of investment in that very wide-ranging talk. So, of course, there are lots of questions that it raises, but I'm gathering from what you're saying that you're really saying that sort of investment through agencies like art investment companies is now an established part of the art market. And I wondered in your research, if you've been able in any detail to sort of track how, well, I have a number of questions, but how far a wealth company is actually what do they say to their clients? I mean, what kind of sort of offer do they make in terms of investment, and particularly the is it a short-term, long-term issue, which is, I think, one of the big ones in the art market? And then maybe how big a role does investment by wealth managers play in the art market? Is it as much as we perhaps think because of all the noise made about it, or is it, less important perhaps?
Thank you, Adriana, for your questions, which allow me to expand a little bit on a few things that I didn't say or you didn't even talk about. First of all, what I am talking about is not even an established part of the art market. I guess the modus operandi of trying to use some financial techniques in the art market is definitely a model, a pattern that is there. But in terms of scope, in terms of volume, so in terms of financial significance, it's definitely nothing compared to, or very, very small compared to the other established financial markets. So the pattern is being established, but the volume, the depth, so in other words, the returns, the financial returns from those markets are still fairly small. And the second point, which maybe is even more important, which makes this research both fascinating and very difficult, is that there is one word that I didn't pronounce, which is absolutely essential, is secretive. So we talk about private banking, and it's private in both senses of the term. So it's private within the bank, but it's also private in terms of one-on-one relationship with clients. So people can and will say things to you as a researcher, but off the record, and it's not necessarily public. So that is definitely a very important component of this particular kind of research. And that also includes, and as an art historian, I'm sure that you know that, of course, that also includes which works of art does one own, or not, and how much they were able to sell them for. So that is the major challenge. So it is there, and it's very difficult to, I wouldn't say it's not difficult to necessarily difficult to investigate, but it's very difficult. So there's, for example, to be very open, there's a few things that I couldn't show on the slide to you today.
And if I may, following on just to that in general, Elisabetta, do you think that what we're really looking at is a difference between institutions and individuals? Because in the crowdfunding, that seemed to be also a kind of question, and in Charlotte's it was as well, and in Christine's, you know, that there are two different roles. One is the role of the individual, and the role, maybe the more important role now, of institutions.
You're muted. Elisabetta, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. So I don't know if Daniel and Federica would like to respond to this question. For sure, from a public policy perspective, there is the important role of legislation and regulation. You want also at international level harmonization, which is typical, which is an issue of other e-commerce issues. And then also from another perspective of public policy, there is the so-called pretended benefit of democratization of crowdfunding, with which not all the scholars actually agree.
And I think also, just to add to what Elisabetta was saying, is that what we also do see with many, I think it is an individual process, but what we also see is, for most of the successful campaigns, they promote their project by the institutions that they are associated with. So you could say indirectly, some of the gatekeepers still have a gatekeeping function because they are used very, vividly to express, seriousness or quality, or, so indirectly or even directly, because Art Basel has also done crowdfunding projects with Kickstarter. So I think it's not necessarily a movement totally away from traditional gatekeepers and the institutions.
Yeah, if I can add something on the same point, I agree with you totally. And moving to the democratization question, if on the one hand, for sure, crowdfunding is such as any other kind of tool allowing participation for everyone in theory, is in principle something beneficial, because of course it contributes also to the education of these people to something they would not be used to otherwise. On the other hand, moving from this, it is difficult to always, this doesn't mean that we have to talk also democratization, because as I was also highlighting in my presentation together with Professor Riccio, is that, for example, in Italy, we assist to a very, beneficial effect of this legal provision in the northern part, while numbers are very different in the south, and the same in the US. Some centers are very good in terms of community foundations, while others are not. So this was just
all right. So I'm looking at the time, and I wouldn't like to abuse of the extreme kindness of the conference organizers who allowed the extra 15 minutes. And also I wouldn't like to abuse of the time of our very courageous attendees and participants. So I would like to thank everybody very much for being here today with us to experience this interdisciplinary panel with us. So as I mentioned also in the chat, if you would like to stay tuned with the next initiatives of our interdisciplinary forum researching art markets, past, present, and tools for the future, please email me or Adriana or Natalie. And thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully for real. Thank you very much.